Welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys, a former D1 hooper and high school coach, current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sacco for the second Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. And we're going to jump right into this one because we are even more blessed, Wes, to be joined by ESPN NBA draft analyst Jeremy Woo for his second time joining the Pistons Pulse. Jeremy, I know it's a busy time of the year for you. Thank you so much for taking some time out of that busy schedule to join us today.
Yeah, absolutely, man. No doubt. It's starting to get busier this time of year, but also I think a lot more fun to start thinking about the draft and what may happen.
Just dive right into it. Just how different has this cycle been? Just given it seems like there's a lot of uncertainty about the number one guy pretty much up until 30 minutes before last year's draft, but there's not any uncertainty this year. It's been pretty much the same prospect for a few years now. Can you just give us your overall insight into what makes Victor Wembanyama such a generational prospect?
A lot of things to be excited about with Victor. Obviously, we're all going to talk about it a lot and continue to. But I think in a nutshell, it's just like obviously he's super tall, but to not only be super tall, but to be potentially a very modern shot creator type of player with the ability and the skill to shoot over people and to be efficient. Someone you might be able to really run your offense through. Being that type of player and also being at the same time potentially one of the best rim protectors in the NBA in the same player. It's kind of crazy, right? Just combining those two things. And so, when you take the significant upside he offers on both sides of the ball, and you factor in his intangibles, his competitiveness, how smart he is, it all adds up really well. And then you look at the production that he's put up this year, sort of playing as the focal point of his team in France. Really his breakout year as well. All the signs are pointing up for him. So I think a lot to be excited about, and he really lives up to the hype. Like, you go see him, and it's something I think no one's really seen before. It's hard to compare him to other players. So it's nice when we have someone like this with this type of stature as a prospect, and they actually back it up, and you don't feel bad, hyping him up or feeling excited because he more or less he walks the walk.
So you brought up the offensive end and you kind of, talk about running the offense through him. What would you say his best offensive skill set or sets are right now? Like if you're going to run your offense, the Detroit Pistons draft Victor and they're going to run a set or, for an entire quarter, the offense through him, what would that kind of look like, Jeremy, in terms of where he's going to get the ball and where everybody else needs to be, kind of what he can do the best?
He's kind of fits the mold, of this kind of modern positionless offensive player. He just happens to be 7'3" or 4 or however tall he is in shoes. But, I think it don't matter, obviously, which team he goes to, how creative the coach is. But I think obviously it's kind of a dream to have someone who may be that immediately versatile. If we're talking about the Pistons, you have obviously a really high feel perimeter playmaker with Cunningham. You have Ivy, who can really generate downhill attention from defenses, and that's his strength right now. The synergy between those 3 guys I think would be interesting to see. I think obviously with Victor, a lot of 2-man game possibilities with him as the screener or even him as the ball handler, right? Cade is big enough, you could have him screen. I'm just, spitballing about, what it could look like, but a lot of interesting possibilities like that. I think, you can kind of flash him around. He's going to be able to catch it because he's so tall. His ability to kind of receive the ball anywhere and then, turn and face and sort of get to his jumper from anywhere is a huge, huge advantage, obviously, that most players don't really have. Kevin Durant is really the only, not to say that he's that level player yet or will be necessarily, but it's hard to, compare the way he plays on offense. But the way that, KD has always been able to get his shot off over people, Victor should have some of that, right? He can handle the ball really well. He can, play in space. He can isolate against, an advantageous matchup. So for him, some of it's also going to matter. His shot selection as he gets used to the NBA. He can kind of score from wherever, so it really matters. He'll have to sort of figure out where his best spots are. But it's fun to dream about, really, with the different range of things he can do. But I think he can be played all over the floor. I think that's part of why he's so exciting.
Jeremy, you've been doing this, prospect analysis thing for a good while now. I guess for you, when did Wemby sort of become, this prospect who's been on the radar? I mean, he's been on the radar for a few years. I guess for you, around the time, when did he really sort of emerge? And what have you seen just in the last few years that have enabled him to maintain that hype? We've seen a lot of other prospects maybe get that level of hype, but then eventually they kind of fall off. What's allowed Wemby to continue to keep this momentum going when he's, really been in the spotlight, since he was a young teenager?
Yeah, I mean, I've known about him for a few years. I had not seen him live until this year when they came to play Ignite in Vegas in October. And honestly, I watched the under-19s. France lost to the USA that year against Chet and those other guys, but Victor was almost single-handedly, if he hadn't gotten in foul trouble, France was probably going to win that game in the final, I remember. So that was, I think, kind of when it became pretty concrete. And, you see him against these American guys, and he's just a different level of prospect. But I'll be honest, I still had questions even coming into Vegas, just because I had not seen him play in person. I was not as familiar, since I don't go to Europe that often. So I think, for me, it was really, as soon as I saw it in October, I was like, all right, whatever, this is done. It's a wrap. This is unusual, unique player, something I hadn't seen before, and it was fun. But I would say he's been on the radar, but again, it's once you see it live and it's kind of actualized in front of you, it kind of changes how you felt. So it wasn't like I was skeptical, but I didn't know some of the stuff that he could do, and some of that was, due to his situation the season before this with Asvel, which is the previous club he was on, EuroLeague club. He wasn't playing as many minutes. He wasn't in a super featured offensive role. So between him, going to a new team where he had offensive freedom and just, I think, working very hard to expand his own skill set, I think we kind of saw everything kind of just clicked for him at once. And the momentum with his game has continued into the season. He hasn't missed any time, knock on wood. He's been available, and his team's had success. So it's all those things have gone in his pointing the right direction for him.
I mean, you watch this guy do what he does offensively, and it really stands out. But can you kind of talk about the defense? What is he going to bring? And again, we can kind of tie this into the Pistons. How is he going to make life easier or better on the defensive end for guards? Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Killian Hayes, and everybody else around him. Just what is the impact, or what could be the impact on that end of the floor, adding Victor Wembanyama to your team?
The way I guess I've kind of said this for a while with him is just the area that he occupies and can cover in a relatively short amount of time is just massive, right? I mean, he's very tall, he's very long, he has good instincts and anticipation, and he has pretty quick feet, especially for someone who's that tall. So knowing that he can kind of rotate over very quickly, he has the ability to kind of gamble selectively and often, get the ball, whether it's blocking a shot or going to intercept a pass or just deny. He really can get away with a lot being that big. I think there's always, when we're talking about defenders, I think there's just a visual aspect for as a defensive presence. Do you have a physical presence? If you're the other team and you have the ball, the top of the arc, and you see this guy down there, I mean, it's a deterrent, right? So even just by being out there, I think he has that impact right away. I mean, there are not many guys who are as tall as he is, just period, in the NBA too. So I think day one, I think that there's going to be significant defensive impact from him being in the game, because guys are going to know, not only can he rotate over and block shots, he's pretty good getting out onto shooters. I think teams will probably try to attack him in ball screens, but I think he, one unique thing with Victor is he can play a drop and be in a drop and still get out and contest because he's so long, right? So he can get away with a lot just with the tools that he has. I do think it'll probably be smart. And I think my guess would be that whatever team drafts him will probably take this approach as well, where you'll probably want to play him next to a stronger, more physical center, just to sort of save him from some of the matchup difficulties, and just sort of, he's going to take hits playing in the NBA, but like, just if you can save him from having to guard the Embiids of the world all the time, I think it'll be helpful. So again, and if we're talking about Detroit, I think, they already have some of those guys on the roster who are, really true fives, who will allow him to play his natural role if they do get him. So, whether it's Duren or Isaiah Stewart or even Wiseman, they'll have different looks they can try and allow Victor to kind of play his natural role, which is more of like a roving, giant free safety kind of on the weak side.
And that was going to be my next question about, just how he meshes with this roster. Not that the Pistons need to worry about any player messing with the roster coming off of a 17-win season, but you talk about him being more of a roamer. Do you kind of see that as maybe a close equivalent, being like a Jaren Jackson with Memphis, where they've paired him with Valanciunas or Steven Adams, and it kind of just frees Wemby to, like almost pick matchups more, right? And then you have the benefit as well. I mean, he's got that massive wingspan. You could probably almost like a semi-drop, but you probably could, like, just how much more effective can he be in some of those coverages, given how big he is? I mean, is he able to do multiple tasks at once, maybe compared to your usual big?
Yeah, like I said, like I do think teams are going to try to attack him, I'm sure, but like I think that's probably the role where I think it makes the most sense. It'll be a little bit harder to target him and on switches, and even that, again, he's competitive. I think he's going to battle. There'll be quicker guys who will be able to get by him, but I don't view it as like it's not like we're talking about like a Rudy Gobert type of defender who has to be parked kind of near the rim all the time. It's Victor is a little bit more versatile than that. And again, I'm curious to see how teams attack him, just because they're going to try things to try to get him out there on the guards and just away from the basket. But like you said, if you have him in some type of coverage where he's hangs back a little bit more, that's fine too. So I'm just very curious to see how it's going to play out, because there's more space on the NBA floor. But I do think he should be a pretty big net positive defensively, just with his ability to just cover so much ground, like I said.
Back to the offensive end, kind of fitting with those guys. Jalen Duren, just more of a play finisher right now on the offensive end, dunker spot, offensive rebounds, pick and roll lob guy. Isaiah Stewart, obviously his game. Like what kind of big maybe meshes? And I know, like you already talked about it, Jeremy, he's very versatile, so maybe it doesn't matter. But, I mean, is that what it is? He can essentially play with any big man offensively, or is there kind of a prototype of a big man he's next to that you think really showcases his skill set even more?
The fact that you can kind of mix and match with him is definitely a bonus. But I think on the flip side, he helps guys like that who aren't floor spacers, really, because he spaces the floor. So, you can play 4 out with Victor stretching the floor and have, a Jalen Duren setting screens and running. He gives Victor, if he turns the pace, he gives him a passing target, right? And he's so tall, he can, and I think his passing also was an area that got better this year. But he'll be able to, I think having a target for him, whether it's a high-low or what, I think that is also going to be helpful. But I do think part of the beauty of having a guy like Victor, who is really more of a perimeter player, who just happens to be super sized, is you can try all these different creative lineups. Like you could try playing him with 2 bigs and him as sort of a 3. Like it's kind of fungible. And again, I'm curious, who his coach will be and how they'll try to use him wherever he lands. But I don't know if there's one ideal thing. I think that's part of the beauty of his skill set.
This will be the last question before we get to the other prospects. But one thing about Wemby, and you kind of touched on it, is the perimeter game. And offensively, I know that clip went viral where he took the 3 and a miss, and he goes in for the putback dunk. But how much do you buy into the shooting upside? The percentage probably wasn't quite where you want it to be for a guy who could be a knockdown shooter, but you just look at his mechanics, and obviously the shot's unblockable. I guess how much does the unblockability of the shot kind of play into just you talk to people around the league and whatnot, people buying into him being a shooter at the next level?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think knowing, the percentages are what they are, but like, again, he's still young for the level. He's still taking some difficult shots, and he's, experimenting, which is part of, what he likes to do. He likes to try new stuff in the game. And, I definitely view it as something that he'll add. just knowing the way that he works. And again, mechanically, his shot looks pretty good. He'll be able to get it off. It's just, I think, a matter of reps and experience. Will he be like a 40% 3-point shooter? I don't know. It's possible he could be. I don't know if he necessarily will be, but I do think the shot making element is a big part of his upside, because that's going to be the easiest way for him to create shots. Is those type of looks facing up or whatever. So I think that'll come, and he'll get. I think he'll gain a little bit of strength. Like, again, he's sort of narrow. That's sort of his natural body type. I don't think he's going to get like overly muscled. I don't think he wants to, but that's okay. Like, the skill level that he has and the motor skills and the agility that he has with his body type, I think, is much more important from my perspective for his development than him gaining 30 pounds.
As we know, the Pistons only have a 14% chance of the number 1 overall pick, which is the only spot they're going to get Victor Wembanyama. So while we have Jeremy, we're going to talk about all the other potential guys that could land with Detroit at 2, 3, 4, and 5. And there's a pretty good list. So we're going to go to a short break. And when we come back, we're going to ask Jeremy about some of those guys.
All right, we're back with segment 2. And it seems like every draft cycle, you eventually get to the point where maybe you're the number 2 guy who's been locked into that spot. And then conversation shifts eventually. And we've gotten to that point with Brendan Miller and Scoot Henderson. Jeremy, in your latest mock draft, you have Brendan Miller as your second overall prospect. But how big, if at all, do you see, the gap between Miller and Scoot right now? And how much of that probably depends on just the team that's going to draft there as well?
I think for me personally, like, I'd probably prefer Scoot between the two, just like in a vacuum. But I do think it does really hinge on the team and sort of like what the need is going to be. Like, I think that's kind of where we've landed and how we're looking at the draft right now. Scoot, like, obviously came out of the gate with that great showing against Wembanyama in Las Vegas. His season itself, he missed some time with injury. He was a little bit up and down. I don't think he was as consistent maybe as you might have hoped for a guy who was in his second year in the G League. Obviously, he's still young for the level. Their team, I don't think, was quite as gifted this year all around. It wasn't quite as well constructed. So that was also, I think, a factor. But I think the feeling among NBA teams right now is that he could have had maybe a more impressive season. He's gotten a little bit better shooting it, but he has some habits to improve and just tendencies that I think could be better. But again, Scoot is incredibly athletic, super dynamic, going downhill, has pretty nice upside, I think, and a pretty solid floor as a guy who's going to be a starter. And with the upside to be, a very, very difficult scorer to stop. Like, you look at the success De'Aaron Fox has eventually had, and De'Aaron's a little bit bigger, a little bit different type of athlete. Scoot is like a linebacker type of body and just can like barrel to the basket. It's a little bit different, but I think that mold of player takes a little bit of time, but I think Scoot, has the ability to kind of do that and be that type of leader for an offense. So, if you need a point guard, I think he's a pretty strong choice considering what else is on the board. In the case of Miller, people kind of came around on him over the course of the year if they weren't already on board in terms of scouting. Like, I think he didn't come in as like a consensus top pick or anything. I wasn't sure where he was going to be coming in. I knew of him and I'd seen him and I knew there's a chance he could go lottery, but I didn't know how well he was going to play, obviously. And so I think anytime you're the number 1 offensive option on, what is more or less the best team in the country for most of the season, they were the number 1 overall seed, putting together a pretty strong year overall. I think it's going to, get you some momentum, right? If you're the more effectively the most people's pick as the top college prospect. So, and also being a tall wing who can shoot, that's attractive. It's an archetype that teams need to fill. So there are some holes in his profile. His finishing wasn't great. He didn't play that well against top opponents at times, like top 50 rated teams or whatever. But and he's a little bit older. If you're picking 2 and you have a point guard, like for example Detroit, like if you have Ivy and you have Cunningham, and those are 2 guys where you're going to want to give the ball to, it might make sense to take someone who is more of a wing if you don't view it as that much separation between those 2 guys. So I think that's sort of where situationally you can see where it might go in that direction.
So you mentioned archetype. So, regardless of what a team would need, Jeremy, how much does the archetype of Brandon Miller being this, 6'9" wing scorer, two-way player, is that way more attractive to you as an evaluator? Do you value someone that fits that archetype of player more than, say, the explosive, undersized, quote-unquote, point guard that is Scoot Henderson? So just in general, regardless of fit for a team, do you value that archetype of Brandon Miller higher than that of Scoot Henderson?
It's a good question. Look, I think you can never really have too many tall wings. Me personally, I wouldn't say I really look at it like that. Like I think everything is case by case. Like there are obviously roster building preferences that someone might have. And I do lean towards, like, I prefer taller guards. I like the idea of having if I were just building a team, I like the idea of having a big, tall, skilled team. But you have to kind of look at everything one-to-one as it is right now. And I don't think I would just allow that to just strictly determine how I would draft. But the person on my team would have a say in that. I don't know. Again, so that I guess that's my answer, is that generally I think wings are a little bit more plug and play oftentimes, and everyone needs them. And for it to be a quality NBA point guard, it's a high bar to clear. And I think Scoot still has some questions with his jumper. He needs to be a little bit better defensively. We can nitpick all these guys. I guess that'd be my answer. I don't have like a straight answer on, if one archetype is necessarily more valuable. I think it's very situational.
This has been a 3-player draft, really for the past, probably 3-4 months, when he says Brandon Miller, kind of just showed how excellent he is at shooting at Alabama. I don't want to say there's a fall off after 3, but how strong do you see maybe that 4 through maybe 8 range, 4 through 9? It seems like there's so many guys who are sort of being considered throughout the rest of that. Do you see players who could get maybe to that, Miller Scoot tier, or do you see maybe a talent fall off once you get past the top 3?
I think it's kind of eye of the beholder. There definitely is this big group of guys who I think are all pretty interesting prospects. I don't know that they're like, it's tricky. Like, I don't know if any of them are like necessarily like 100% like safe bets right? Like some of them are safer than others. But we're not talking about guys who anyone is like sure or is going to be an all-star or anything, or like feels great about. But I do think they're interesting players here. For me, like in the next group, like Anthony Black is probably my favorite of those guys. He's someone who I really, really like. I just like his size, the way he contributes on both ends. I thought he made really impressive strides as a scorer this year. He's going to have to keep shooting the ball better. His catch and shoot game has improved. It's not amazing, but I just think you can never have too many guys who are super smart, who can play out of different spots on the floor, who have the size to switch defensively and give you flexibility with your matchups. I just think he does a lot of winning things, and there are not a lot of guys like that who can actually play point guard. So, like, I really like Anthony Black, but that whole group of guys, I think Jarris Walker, Amen Thompson, Cam Whitmore, you can throw Taylor Hendricks, and Asar Thompson. I think some people might say could put him in that group too. That's probably the next group of guys in like that 4 to 10. I don't think I forgot anybody. Cason Wallace might be on the periphery of that, but it's a group of interesting players who I think all are talented, and you can argue that any which way.
With Anthony Black, Jeremy, do you see him, let's say he ended up with Detroit. One, do you think he would be a good fit there? Because, we talked about the playmaking and the ball handling of Caden Ivey, but, can he play more off the ball? Like, I personally wouldn't be concerned about it, but is he a guy that needs to have the ball in his hands operating in ball screens all the time? Or do you think he provides a lot of value with that high basketball IQ as a kind of a secondary creator? And then also, I guess, kind of to ask 2 questions, how good is the defense? Because that's one thing I've heard talked about a lot with him. And I'm just curious, like, how versatile, how good that defense is for Anthony Black.
Sure. Yeah. The fit in Detroit, I think, to me, it's tricky just because I think he's a little bit redundant with Cunningham. He's not as far along coming into the NBA as Cade was in terms of his shooting, but comparable size, comparable probably role deployment on both ends. And I think the fact that his catch and shoot game is still is going to require a little bit of work. I think that makes it a little tricky. I think it'd make it, for me, if I were to trade, it would make it tricky for me to take him. Just because I don't know if you want to duplicate that skill set. There might be more value in having a different type of player. But I do think that, again, if you had to like squeeze him in there, I think he's smart enough and has the size where it would kind of work. Like you can kind of fudge it. But it wouldn't be my first pick for Detroit necessarily. To your second point, I do think defensively he's pretty good. He has very good balance. He has good hands and feet. I don't know that he's going to be guarding 6 foot tiny guards who are super fast. But I do think he is big and agile enough to kind of bother ball handlers. You can put him on wings. You can kind of definitely can switch him around. There aren't many guys who are like true lockdown. Like I'm going to have you go guard Jason Tatum, right? But I think he's probably that next year guy where he can be a really good team defender and, still bother and slow down certain matchups. And that was an area I think that everybody kind of feels good about with him after this season.
One player I think I was cool on maybe earlier on, but has begun to warm up to was Cam Whitmore. And, I think you look at the Pistons, they need to go for upside. But, I think if you look at that roster, they also need a guy who could defend and knock down shots that, I think long-term Whitmore's probably a guy who can do both of those things. But where are you as far as him as a prospect, and how do you kind of sort through his uneven season at Villanova where, maybe the numbers don't quite represent who he is as a player?
They had a weird year, obviously, coaching transition, different team. But I think I'm kind of in the same place on him as I was before the season. Like the game I saw him play, he wasn't great, but the stuff that he can do is still, it's kind of a unique package. He's a very good athlete, obviously. Doesn't have incredible length, but he definitely is going to make your team more athletic. He's going to be able to get downhill. I think he'll shoot enough that the threat of his shot will allow him to attack closeouts. And then, once he gets ahead of steam going to the basket, that's a good thing for him. So his overall offensive game as sort of like a 3-4, he'd be undersized to play the 4, but probably is more of a true 3. Plus the upside he's shown in terms of creating his own shot a little bit. I think that's all stuff to like ultimately. And, again, considering what else is in the lottery, like the way that he scores and what he brings is a little bit different than all these other guys. And I do like him as a fit for Detroit because I think for the Pistons, one prerogative I think should be getting more athletic. If you're picking from this next group of guys, like you need shooting, you need more athleticism. Ivy was a step in that direction into being a good transition team. Cade is not like a high elite athlete by NBA standards. He's good, but not like, his physicality is not like the first thing you think of when you think of Cade. And then, obviously they have these other bigs. So I think having another guy who can get downhill, a guy who can make a shot, I think would fit. So yeah, Whitmore, I think his floor his floor is pretty, I think, solid. I don't think he's ever going to be like a number one true option because I don't know feel-wise, passing-wise, that he's like that type of guy. But I do think he has a pretty clear pathway to a successful role and probably being a starter if his development goes well.
A guy I got to ask you about is Jarris Walker. He seems like every episode we talk about the draft, we kind of overlook him. We don't end up asking or talking about him. But I see him like number 4 on a lot of boards, Jeremy, and a lot of people who are very high on him. Can you kind of just give us the scout on Jarris Walker? And then also, obviously your personal thoughts on what his ceiling is. Would he fit really well with this team? I've heard like defensive versatility. He can guard 1 through 5. I'm like, well, I mean, if he can truly do that, that's pretty valuable. So just the Jarris Walker experience, I guess.
I view him as, I think the reason why he's ranked high is more because I think the floor with him is pretty bankable. There aren't that many guys with his type of body. He's just naturally a very strong guy. I don't know if I view him as like a true like 5 position defender because there aren't very many of those guys, and he is a little bit heavier. Like just with that body type, I don't know if I trust him. I would say like I would expect him to be switching on to point guards all the time, but he does give you that versatility in that I think he'll be able to defend both forward spots, switch a little bit, maybe in a pinch onto smaller guys, and then there might be situations where he can play some small ball 5 just because he's so long. So there just aren't a ton of guys who can let you play small, both offensively and defensively like that. And I think he, as long as his shooting, I think that's a key offensive development area. He's been a hesitant 3-point shooter in the past. Seemed to be getting a little bit better by the end of the season and more confident. That's a key area for growth. Jarris has always been a very good passer also, which I'm curious to see how that will manifest, in his pro career. Transition, yes. Half court, maybe you can put him in short roll situations, sort of use his vision. But that is a component of his game that I think maybe didn't always shine through in college. That it's there if you go look at him in high school, making some pretty impressive passes. He also used to be very turnover prone, but I think he's harnessed it a little bit. I think at Houston we saw Jarris kind of buy into kind of being that glue guy. And again, maybe that's not the type of player we always talk about as someone who would take top 5 based on upside, but I do think he's relatively safe. And if he, if he goes and crushes some shooting workouts and teams are like, oh, well, this guy might be able to do all these things pretty quickly. Think about like how Patrick Williams went number 4. Again, hasn't totally lived up to that slot. He hasn't quite delivered on that yet, but he was the hot name in that draft. And so I think Jarris, his tools and his, basic skill framework and versatility are appealing, particularly with in today's NBA, the way teams want to play.
Jeremy, we'll let you go on this one. The Thompson twins, I think, are probably, 2 of the most polarizing prospects in this draft, especially when you look at players who, seem like pretty clear. I won't say locks, but they seem likely to go in the top 10. Sort of what's your evaluation of them, sort of sorting through, them playing for overtime elite? And between the two, which one do you think would probably fit better for Detroit? just given that maybe Al-Min is seen as having more upside, but Asar is probably the more wing player of the two, so to speak.
Where those guys fall, I think, is going to be one of the more interesting storylines as we get closer to the draft and we learn more about workouts and, who is drafting where, obviously. The upside, I think, is there. They're both athletic, tall wings. Always going to be an interesting thing. Amen is more of the I think wants to be also a point guard. Has great speed in the open court, unique passing ability. The upside is there, but he's not a very good shooter. He's not. I think Asar is probably the more of a true wing. He embraces defense a little bit more. He's more aggressive as a scorer in the half court. And I think he made more strides as a shooter. So it kind of depends on how you want to look at it. Like if you're going to argue upside, then you might argue for Amen. If you're going to argue for a floor and maybe ready, being closer to actually giving you minutes, it might be Asar. I've heard it argued both ways from teams. But I do think their range, it's probably 4 through the back of the lottery. I do think it can go a number of different ways because they are both facing a really big jump in level, obviously being older players playing for OTE. Now all of a sudden you're going to go play in the NBA from day one. It's a big change that's hard to quantify. So speaking to the fit with Detroit, I almost think Asar might be more of a fit because they might want a more defensive-minded, bigger wing. The fact he's further along as a shooter and doesn't need the ball as much, I think is probably a bonus. Depends on where they're picking. But some of what in a perfect world, what Amen might bring to a team, it might be a little bit redundant with what you're hoping Jaden Ivey is going to become, right? You could have 2 really fast guys playing in the open court. It'd be pretty crazy. But at the same time, you've got Cunningham, who's more of a half court oriented player, and you kind of have to sometimes thread the needle a little bit. And again, Cade is someone who also is going to warrant having the ball a lot. So if I had to, pick for Detroit, I think Asar fits better. If you were just going to look at it as a duality of those two.
Last question, and then we will let you go, Jeremy. It'll be a quick one. The Pistons are on the clock at 4. The top 3 goes off the way we all expect. So Whitmore's there, Amin, Asar, Jarris Walker, your guy Anthony. Who would you choose if you're the Detroit Pistons at number 4 after missing out on Victor, Brandon Miller, and Scoot Henderson?
I think I like Whitmore as a fit there. I'd probably be between Whitmore and Walker, just based on what that roster needs, just considering I don't necessarily think there's so much separating all those guys that it would be a clear cut. You have to take this guy regardless for them. Their situation is unique just because you've invested in these high lottery picks and you want them to have the best possible environment to succeed. So I think I'd probably lean Whitmore because I think they need scoring. Walker, you've already got enough bigs where you might be able to kind of figure that out as you go. But I think Whitmore would give them a dynamic they probably don't have in terms of a guy who might be able to eventually get, 18, 20 points a game, and really put pressure on the defense going downhill. And hopefully someone who you can use different ways, and will also someone who's athletic enough to kind of run in transition with Ivy. So that's what I'd say, just like without having thought about it too hard.
All right, guys, we are going to go to a short break. We're going to come back. Omari and I are going to stay around. We're going to talk NBA playoffs. But Jeremy, he's always busy. There's no doubt about that. But, you guys know this time of year, he's super busy. So again, thank you so much to Jeremy Woo for joining us. Real quick, let everybody know, obviously you're on ESPN. We all know how to find ESPN, but your Twitter, socials, whatever else, wherever you're putting out work and content, Jeremy, please let the listeners know.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Jeremy Woo. It's just my name. I no longer have a blue check. It's okay.
All right, awesome, Jeremy. Again, thank you so much for making some time for us today. Follow Jeremy Woo on Twitter. You have a lot of great draft content, coming up in the lottery in a couple of weeks, and then of course through the draft as well. And again, get some sleep, man. I know it's going to be a long couple of weeks, a couple months ahead. So again, we appreciate you coming on. All right, we're back here with segment 3, and I'm curious to see if you agree with me on this one, Bryce. I thought this first round was like the best first round of the playoffs I've seen in a while. Like, I was just blown away almost every single night by at least one of the games.
Yeah, I saw you tweeting about this, and I think our guy Keith Black Trudeau. What years did he send back at you? I saw he sent 2 years at you.
He said 2014, which I watched, in 1993, which I did not watch, given that I am 28 years old. So I'm about to go back and watch some of those games.
So I was only 6, even in 1993. So yeah, I mean, I've had a blast. We don't always, here's the nice thing. I'm going to get crushed for this. The nice thing about the Pistons not being in the playoffs is like, we get to just watch basketball, right? Like, and this is even more so for you. You watch Pistons games, but you're always writing and taking notes. Like, I've seen this firsthand. We went out to a restaurant to watch the game together, and the whole time you're just taking notes. Like, it wasn't even like we got to enjoy it. Even whenever I'm doing it's a lot of the same stuff, not even to the level of you. So what I like is I watched this Warriors-Kings series, Omari, literally just as a fan. I could care less who won, who lost, what happened. It didn't matter. And so it's just fun being a fan sometimes. And on top of it, as you're saying, we got incredible games over the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I'm not even on Twitter during a lot of these games. Like, I'm like last year, I'm making a point to like not really scroll to TL and just like kind of go off bench and just tweet here and there. Just, I'm on Twitter enough, but it's just nice to not even just be on Twitter, just like watch basketball, just take it in, not have to follow like a larger discussion. And man, like I'm even looking at like round 2, like the day this episode publishes tomorrow, we'll get like Lakers, Warriors, which. I mean, like LeBron is 39 and Steph's 35. We're getting another chapter in like their battle. It's just like, it's like being a kid in like a candy shop these games, man. Like, it's just been insane.
Yeah, that's what's funny too, is I feel like the urge to tweet. Do you ever get that? I'm watching these games. I'm like, man, I should be like tweeting something out right now. And so I'll like, Trey Lyles comes up or something like that. And so I'll tweet about him, who he did have a decent series for the Kings. He looked pretty good, but no, it is. The other thing, Omari, was 1 through 8 seeds all represented in this semifinals with 8 teams left. So we have a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, all the way down. And it's crazy, the upsets that we got. The Warriors and Lakers is interesting, right? Because they're very talented teams that got to those points in kind of weird ways. The Miami Heat, Omari, not only like they lost a play-in game at home and then won, and then they upset the Milwaukee Bucks. I know that, Giannis was injured for a couple games or whatever, as a game and a half or 2.5. I don't know. It's been so much fun, but it's something, man. It's a great time to be an NBA fan. I do know that.
Yeah, especially with Tyler Hero being out. And I know, when he first got that injury, they said he'd be out 4 to 6 weeks, which, I mean, I'm just like, no matter how deep Miami goes, he's probably out for the playoffs. And just to see Jimmy Butler kind of hit like that next level as we've seen him do in past playoff performances, I think is kind of what makes that special. I think I feel like Jimmy's legacy is tough to like quantify, I guess. Yes. Because he is not like, he is like borderline all NBA during the regular season, but he's not quite like on that like LeBron, Steph, Giannis tier. But then you get to the playoffs and he just becomes like this absolute killer. And I think I saw a stat, like he hit more 3-pointers in like the first round than he hit
all
in, like,
season.
The last, like, like it was just like insane. Like he was turned into like a 3-point shooter, and it kind of creates fun debates about competitiveness. And I think when you get to the playoffs, you can really see what kind of separates the good players from like the great players to the elite players. And Jimmy Butler is like absolutely elite. Like Milwaukee has some stuff going on behind the scenes. Like I know that story came out about Mike Budenholzer tragically losing his brother, which is really sad. And of course, Giannis, missed a few games as well. But even so, I mean, an 8-1 upset is just insane. I mean, Milwaukee won 57 games, 57 games, and they have been banged up all year. I don't think anybody really wants to face Miami. You have Eric Spoelstra, who of course is one of the most accomplished coaches ever, one of the best X's and O's coaches. His teams are always prepared. Shout out to parity. I'll just say that. Shout out to parity. Shout out to there not being a huge gap between these 1 seeds and these 8 seeds or 2 and 7s or whoever. Just the Lakers and the Warriors like pulling off upsets. Technically putting off upsets, and I kind of put that in quotes because I think if Anthony Davis didn't miss how many games he missed, like 20 or 30 games, and the Warriors were banged up, they're probably higher seeded, and they're not really the seeds that they're being shown as on paper. But I'm just happy we're past the super team era and we could like watch these teams actually battle and compete. I think just the intrigue level in the playoffs is just something we haven't seen. We've had these last few years, we just haven't seen that level of parity where it's like, I don't know what's going to happen over the next month or so.
Well, and we talked about this with the Western Conference anyway. We knew this going in that, like the Suns is the 4 seed or whatever, were a lot of people's betting favorites. And, the Nuggets, when we're recording this, are actually up 1-0 with a really impressive win on Saturday. But you brought up a good point. Like the Lakers, Anthony Davis missed games, and their true team didn't come together till the deadline, and they still have one of the greatest players to ever play in LeBron. Same thing with the Warriors. So I don't know that we should overreact to this year and like, yep, this is going to start happening all the time. We're going to see all these upsets. You're talking about 2 of the greatest players ever in Steph and LeBron and their teams pulling these quote-unquote upsets when both teams battled injuries all year. Andrew Wiggins missed how many games at the end of the season? And it took a 50 bomb from Steph in Sacramento for them to pull this off. So I do think we should be a little bit slow to think that like this is just going to become the norm. I want to revisit the Jimmy Butler thing because you bring up an interesting idea, Omari. Jimmy Butler, 6-time All-Star, has never been better than All-NBA third team. And that's no slouch. Like, that's nothing to scoff at, but 4 times All-NBA third team. He's never been an All-Defensive first team, but he has been 5 times second team, was most improved in 2015 and the steals leader in 2021. So like you say, it's like he's going to be one of the hardest players to really quantify because he doesn't have an MVP. He doesn't even have a second team All-NBA, let alone a first team All-NBA. But he's one of these guys that everybody knows when the playoffs starts, he just gets buckets. And I can use it here because they call him Jimmy Buckets. And what was the stat I saw the other day? He's never had a 40-point regular season game, Omari, but he has like 10 or something in the playoffs. Like there's these narratives that get created sometimes and it's based off 1 or 2 games. With Jimmy, it's real and it happens and it's like such a large sample size that you can't even doubt it. I did see he was like questionable for Tuesday night's game though from the ankle injury.
Yeah, I mean he banged up his ankle pretty bad, and I saw a report that ankle swelled up pretty terribly after. So I guess we'll just have to see with that. And I mean again, like I think it's going to be really hard to kind of figure out how to rank Jimmy. At this point, he's probably a Hall of Fame player. I mean, he took Miami to the finals in 2020, and now you have this run now. The Miami Heat were just an interesting team to me, I think, all summer because, for one, they really did not have the depth you usually see from a contending team. Like, you have Butler, you have Adebayo, those are your top 2 guys. Tyler Hero, like your second best scorer. But then just from like a depth standpoint, they just kind of rely on guys stepping up. I mean, Kyle Lowry, I mean, he's clearly in the twilight of his career. He put together some good playoff games, really helped him. But I remember Gabe Vincent hitting I think he had like 7 or 8 threes on those last games against the Pistons, and he's just been on fire since. And just for them to get those contributions, it's like there's like a handful of NBA teams who just always have random guys who, somehow become good players. And I feel like the Miami Heat, it's almost like they go into seasons expecting just some of these guys who aren't very well known to be able to step up, whether it's like a Duncan Robinson or whoever
Max
else. Max Strus. They just always have these guys. Like I don't know how they do it. You always hear about heat culture and whatnot. To me, I think it just shows like the value of knowing your culture and knowing what players fit. You kind of look at that infamous practice with Jimmy Butler when he was still back in Minnesota, and I think he beat the starters of like the third team or whatnot. But he finds a team that fits his game perfectly and understand him. Like the mentality is there. And I think he's 33 or 34. He just had his best season. He had his best regular season, like this past year. And if there's anything about the playoffs, I think especially with this one, I think with that parity, you're able to see just, when teams lean back on their schemes and just knowing their personnel, knowing who can step up. Like that really makes a difference when it comes down to it. Like it doesn't matter who you are on paper. At the end of the day, you just got to have some dogs.
Well, I'll be honest, this playoffs has made me believe even more in my thought process with the Pistons team building, in that you don't have to build this like perfectly constructed roster that you would say is a champion. Like just build a really good roster, Omari. I'm interested to see what you think about this. Get a roster together that gives you a chance every year. Like that's what I want. I feel like a lot of times fans want this roster that's just perfectly cookie cutter. And I just don't think you can recreate the Warriors of everybody fits together perfectly. No, give me a really good roster. You said it. You got to get a couple stars. There's no doubt. You got to have a culture, and then you fill it out with really good role players, but you just give yourself a chance every single year. We're going to get in the playoffs. We're going to get some home court, and we're going to give ourselves a chance. And maybe there's an injury. Maybe somebody has a bad series, whatever it is. And just, I don't want the Pistons to have one perfect season with a chance to win an NBA championship. I would like to see Troy Weaver and the organization build out a roster where they have 10, 15 years of they're in the dance every single time. They have a chance, and they're just giving themselves a chance every year. So that's where I think I disconnect with a lot of people as I talk about building this Pistons roster. But to me, how the playoffs have played out so far, really, to me, that looks like what you want to do, and with parity and the way the NBA is going.
Yeah, because most teams really only have like maybe two players who are just like the guys, right? Sometimes you get lucky, you're able to have more, but like you look at Denver, right? It's Jokic and it's Jamal Murray. You look at Miami, it's Jimmy Butler and it's Bam. It really is, it's just been Jimmy. I mean, I don't know if anybody else is really like, I think he's like 85% responsible for everything that they've done so far. You even look at a team like a Milwaukee, right? They just like completely fizzled out. So there's really no perfect science. There's really no, you talk about chasing certain archetypes, or you need this or you need that. Really, you just need talent, and then you just figure things out as you go. Which is why I still even go back to like Rudy Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns, and Cat missed so much of the season. I just don't think they ever really had a chance to develop the chemistry that they needed. Clearly based on how they kind of fell apart toward the end. But, I would just say, just get guys who fit your system, get guys who are competitive, who are along for the ride, right? Like they're locked in, they believe in what you're doing. I think in the long run, you kind of see that teams that have that, kind of have that self-belief, where you could have a really uneven regular season to get to the playoffs, and that self-belief kind of takes over. And, that trust in the coach, trust in the scheme, trust in your teammates, all those things kind of take over. And it really makes a difference sort of in those final moments. We saw the Memphis Grizzlies unravel, and I still think their rebuild overall has been a huge success story. Like people will say they got too sidetracked this past season, and they did. Like they were immature. They did a lot of stuff they shouldn't have done. But I would still argue they're not even really that far away from winning the ring if they just get that one trade right or this and that. So for the Pistons, absolutely, you have Cade, you have Ivy, you have Durant. You have some players who can step into fulfill certain roles. Talk about Isaiah Stewart just with the toughness, and eventually maybe some of the shooting he'll be able to bring, and just get that talent floor up right. We can even look at I don't know how much you thought the Lions draft, but they just take guys who just fit what they're trying to do, and it's like, well, maybe these guys don't fit, but you don't know what guys can become down the road, and you don't know who could step up. So shout out parity, and I think this playoffs is a very big vote of confidence for just the idea of building around culture more so than maybe chasing a particular fit or particular archetype for your team.
Well, and I think the other thing it's shown us, Omari, is get your stars, get your culture, and then find guys that are willing to take the role that you need them to fill on your team. And Wes and I text about this. Bruce Brown. I love Bruce Brown. And he's found a role, and he fills his role. And I don't want to turn this into the Troy Weaver traded him for nothing conversation or whatever, but like, what would Bruce Brown's role be with this Pistons team over the last 3 years be anyway? Now, I'm not saying that makes it okay that he got traded for nothing. I'm not saying that, Omari. I'm just saying this Pistons organization would have asked him to play a role that isn't what he's doing in Denver, and he probably wouldn't be very successful in it. Trey Lyles is another example, Omari. A lot of Pistons fans hated Trey Lyles because of how many shots. I was like, Trey Lyles does some good things. He goes to a Kings team where that role makes a little more sense because they're trying to win games, and he does a lot of really good things for him. My point is, I think I've seen in these plays, like, yes, you got to find guys eventually. Once you have the stars, once you have your culture, you got to find those guys that really fit into these roles and they make sense. And there's a lot of those guys in the league. Like, again, Trey Lyles had a really good season for the Sacramento Kings and some really good moments in the playoffs. So I think that's when you start to really hone in on those guys, is once you have your stars and your culture established.
Yeah, Trey was playing a lot of small ball five in Detroit just because, it was a COVID season, so you kind of had that run, and then you had some injuries as well. And, I think, you go back to Bruce Brown, Trey, you ask players to do too much and not necessarily play to their strengths, you're going to have that problem. Like Bruce, is he probably your lead point guard? Probably not. You put him next to Jokic, and again, he's Jokic. I think anybody can play next to him. But now it's just, okay, you knock down open threes and defend and do some secondary playmaking. And now it's like, oh, okay, like he's shooting, like he's extremely efficient, but it's just because you simplified his role. We can even talk, maybe it's going to be a little bit thorny, but the most recent example was Sadiq Bey, right? Where he just goes to Atlanta, and it's just, you just have to catch and shoot. And it's like, oh, okay, I'm Sadiq Bey. That's what I do, and he's not second guessing himself. He's just, catching and launching threes. And I think what kind of happened is that the Pistons, I don't think they were at fault for having him do, maybe more that was outside of his range, because you want to give players a chance to, spread their wings. But, again, I think you see he goes to Atlanta. He's on a rebuild situation. He's with a playoff team, and they have a very clear hierarchy of pecking order. He can just go in there, and he only has to be responsible for two things, right? Try to play defense, knock down open threes. And he has some good games for him, right? Like, still maybe more of a role player or so than I used to talk about him, where he has some star potential, but still a very important role. And I think role really, like, we get to the playoffs, like, that's everything.
Yeah, and I think this team just isn't and hasn't been in a situation where those guys really shine, right? And we all I get caught up in it, right? Like, I've been I was disappointed in Isaiah Livers this year, but a guy like Isaiah Livers probably isn't going to look great in his role that you need. One, everybody's been playing a role too high, Omari. You just outlined it with Sadiq Bey. Sadiq Bey went to Atlanta and was exactly what a lot of people said we felt like he was, which is probably the first guy off the bench, second guy off the bench. I think like 66% of his field goal attempts with Atlanta were 3-point attempts. And now, you know what else, Omari? Talking about his defense, he has more energy to play defense now because he's not taking that offensive load. So I just don't think Detroit's been in a situation to, one, highlight those guys in those roles, or two, even let them fill those roles because everybody's had to play a role too high. Now, I think as the roster, hopefully you have your stars, Jaden and Cade and some of these guys. Now it starts to work itself out. The hierarchy works itself out just a little bit more. I know we got sidetracked. It is a Pistons podcast, so I guess it can't be sidetracked if we start talking about the Pistons. But before we close it down here, Amari, let's get some predictions. So we're doing this Monday afternoon. Some game ones have been played. So, excuse us. We cheated just a little bit. Let's start in the East, Amari. We got the 76ers and Celtics. They haven't played a game one. They'll play it tonight, but, we've recorded before that. What do you have in that series?
It's the Celtics. I think if Embiid, were healthy, this would, for me, it'd just be a Game 7 coin flip, honestly. Because I think Boston, like, a lot of their defensive strength is just, with their bigs, and Embiid is bulletproof, so what are you going to do? But without Embiid, you need James Harden to step back to that number one role that he hasn't been that guy for a few years. Like, I just don't see how this series goes longer than 6, unless they're able to at least get one of the first 4 games, and you get them beat back maybe in game 4, and then maybe that gives you some momentum. But that's a pretty easy Boston pick for me just because of Embiid's injury.
I got Celtics in 5. I agree with you on a lot of that. The other Eastern one, so this is the one. Game 1 has already been played in New York. Miami stole it. So Miami's up 1-0 on the Knicks. Where do you have this series going, Amari?
So this is another one where you have the injury, and he's got Julius Randle, the ankle injury. Like, what exactly does he come back? New York should win this. I think if they're healthy, they win this series. They're just a lot deeper, and but at the same time, Jimmy Butler is the best player in that series. And that means a lot. You have a lot of players for Miami who have been red hot and have just really stepped up. So that's tough. I want to go. I think I'm still going to go New York because I'm assuming Brandon will be back for games 3 or 4. But I could absolutely see this one going 7 games, and I have no confidence in that pick.
I got Heat in 6, man. Like, I don't mean to be a Knicks hater, but I feel like they've capped out their ceiling right now. And there's, as much as I don't want to root for Jimmy Butler, which most of the listeners understand this, bro, my wife didn't watch an NBA game all season long. I got the Pistons on every night. I have the Heat game on Sunday afternoon. She is locked in, just watching. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, she doesn't even hide it, bro. So, I still got to stick with what I truly think will happen. Heat in 6. All right, Suns, Nuggets, that's another one. Nuggets up 1-0. I will be honest. Having game 1 already played, this is going to change it's not going to change who I pick, but it's changing how many games I would have said if I would have predicted before game 1.
I don't have confidence in this Phoenix team. And it's weird because, you have Devin Booker, you have Def, you have Kevin Durant, obviously. You would think that would give you a really high floor. But when I watch them, they just don't inspire confidence in me. They look like a team that's still figuring things out, and that's because they are still figuring things out. I think, Kevin Durant, maybe played 1 or 2 regular season games. And just from a talent floor standpoint, you're good enough to win. But you don't want to be figuring things out in the playoffs. That's just not a good position to be in. And this Denver Nuggets team is all the way locked in. I think Jamal Murray, another player we're talking about who can level up his game in the playoffs, that makes a big difference. They have their system. They have depth. To me, I just see Denver getting this one in 5 or 6 games. I just don't have a lot of confidence in Phoenix.
I love it because we're going to be opposite a lot. I still got the Suns in 7. All right, the one that I'm most intrigued by, because I just think this is going to be a lot of fun. Steph is my all-time favorite player to watch. We got the Lakers and Warriors. We talked about it. LeBron versus Steph, 2 legends of the game. Where are you going with this one?
This one is tough because not only do I think they're pretty evenly matched, I think this Lakers team is better than Sacramento was just because they're just significantly more battle-tested. They're just also so stylistically different, where Golden State's Golden State, and then the Lakers are a little bit more physical. They're a little bit more bully ball, I think. I think LeBron and AD, just from a size standpoint, the Warriors have Draymond, and I know playing teams against other teams who are bigger has never really mattered for them. But I just look at what AD's been doing really just all season. I mean, I voted him all NBA because I just thought he was just absolutely phenomenal on both sides of the ball. And that's going to be tough. I can't even really make a prediction. I would take Golden State simply because Golden State and Steph Curry in general are the Tom Brady Patriots for me, where I just can't bet against them. They're just, that track record for success is just too strong. And we've just seen them clutch out so many tough wins that I would lean on that. But this is a really good, really deep, really balanced Lakers team. Just a complete turnaround from where they started off at the beginning of the year. And I just think that's the biggest coin flip I've seen in the playoff series in a while, but I'm going to go Golden State in 7, but I think it comes down to the last few possessions.
All right, so we're going to see us be the same on this one. I'm going to go Warriors in 7 as well. So I think we both have the Celtics roughly the same range, Warriors in 7, and in the other 2 series, we're completely opposite. If not, all I want is 7 games of that series, Omari. Again, This is what's nice about this, not being a fan of anything, is you can just root for that type of stuff. So give us 7, a game 7. I would believe it would be at the Chase Center. LeBron versus Steph, maybe each of their last chance to get there. I don't know, the way they're playing, maybe they got 5 more years in them, but that would be absolutely epic. So let us know. Leave a review, tweet at us, leave it in the DB comments on Freep website, wherever. Let us know where you guys are at in all these series. But we will be back next week. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Jeremy Wu breaking it down for us, some NBA playoffs talk. Omari, take it away, my guy.
All right. A big shout out to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our executive producer, Anjanette Delgado, and our sports editor, Kirk Crawford. Also, shout out to Wes Davenport, as always. We'll talk to you all next week.